Streets turned to rivers. This is what parts of northern England, Scotland and Wales looked like today after Storm Desmond brought what has been described as extreme and unprecedented rain to much of Britain.
Y en el este de China asciende a 25 el número de fallecidos por un deslizamiento de tierra. Se informa también de que otras 12 permanecen aún desaparecidas y que la mayoría de las víctimas son niños y mayores.
Unas aguas contaminadas que han seguido su curso por los estados de Minas Gerais y Espíritu Santo hacia el Océano Atlántico. En Regencia, en el delta del río, se teme el daño que pueda sufrir la población de tortugas que desovan en la zona.
The theory of catastrophic anthropogenic climate change appears to explain everything. After all, we all know that climate change makes for shorter winters, except for when it makes for harsher winters, and climate change means less snow, except for when climate change means more snow, and climate change causes droughts in California and floods in Texas and Oklahoma, and generally makes wet places wetter and dry places drier, except when it makes wet places drier and dry places wetter. And climate change causes more hurricanes at the same time as it causes less hurricanes. Climate change causes more rain but less water, and less rain but more water. Climate change decreases the spread of malaria at the same time as it increases the spread of malaria, but don't worry, the Terminator himself advises us not to listen to those climate change cynics. Hey guys? What's the problem here? This sounds like the perfect scientific theory. It can explain literally everything, including self-contradictory things.
Global leaders are gathering in Paris to save the world from the biggest threat humanity has ever faced, man-made climate change, despite the fact that man-made climate change and human activity has virtually no impact on heating the planet. The UN is trying to get countries to agree to regulations that would limit temperature increases to 2 degrees Celsius, despite the fact that corrupt, agenda-driven scientists have been caught over and over again faking temperature data to fool everyone into thinking that global warming is real. The actual figures show there's been no global warming since the late 90s. You see, they've been proven wrong time and time again because they're lying to you. So why should we believe them now? As the leaked Copenhagen text revealed, the actual agenda behind these conferences is to stop developing countries from becoming prosperous and challenging the unipolar world order. Increasing CO2 emissions, a byproduct of capitalism, are directly linked to prosperity and higher quality of life. And look, there are real environmental issues that we need to pay attention to, but man-made global warming isn't one of them.
Nous sommes otages d'un scandale planétaire sur le réchauffement climatique. Une machine de guerre destinée à nous maintenir dans la peur. À la base, il y a les scientifiques manipulés, politisés, des conflits d'intérêts, de la corruption, des scandales sexuels, puis des politiques qui ne servent que leur image et leur soif de pouvoir.
Geoengineering programs, which have been ongoing for over 50 years, they're literally designed to change the temperature of our planet. They also manipulate our weather, and they are creating most, if not all, of the changes that we've seen in our climate. So it's very interesting, but very important to note that these programs are not in any of the climate models, and therefore it makes it impossible to determine whether the planet's warming or cooling. Bottom line is this: those models are flawed, they're fraudulent. You cannot move forward with a carbon dictatorship, with the transfer of potentially trillions of dollars of wealth into the hands of a few at the expense of every living thing on the planet, and circumvent constitutions and the sovereignty of nations around the world. That is what they were moving forward with. This is the New World Order. It is the most oppressive government that is planned. It's all based on this concept of carbon, creating all these problems that we're seeing. It's fraudulent, it's flawed, and if we don't do something, if we don't demand that they're stopped, we will see, again, the most oppressive government micromanaging our lives. It will circumvent the laws that we have in our countries and allow this unelected body, where we don't have any representation, to micromanage and mandate our lives. And we're talking a complete carbon dictatorship, not only in what we drive, when we go to work, how we go to work, but what appliances we use, in our home. And now we have these smart meters, which are on the outside of our homes, and they can measure when we're home, what appliances we're using. They're going to mandate what appliances we purchase, what products we buy. This is complete corporate takeover of the planet. It's very, very concerning, Richie. And Stephen Schneider actually addressed, he was a presidential advisor all the way from Nixon to Obama, died a mysterious death. But he spoke, and he was actually part of ClimateGate, about attacking scientists and journalists who would oppose this idea that CO2 is creating global warming. So that was, it's been a planned agenda, and it's been written on paper in terms of how they are attempting to keep this out of the scientific community and out of the media. And again, this agenda is a transfer of the most monetary and political power that we have had in the history of our planet, due to the fact that these climate drivers are missing from these models. What does that make the models? And the consensus amongst scientists who we discussed this with was, well, the models are not accurate. And if they're not accurate, how do you move forward with taxing people, with destroying sovereignty of nations, with stealing against people's will, their money, their sovereignty, their freedoms? And that's what's going on, and people have to take a stand. Only 8% of the population is aware of geoengineering programs. So that means 92% of our populace is likely to believe, because they see that our climate's changing, that it's due to CO2. And that's why people are buying into this. So our message is very strong. We demand that all climate agreements, talks, mandates are immediately rescinded, that all geoengineering programs are immediately stopped, period. And then we'll see what the planet's doing. I think we will find that there is no warming. Follow the money. However, again, you can't determine it until geoengineering is stopped. And that's what I think our leverage is in terms of addressing this in a legal capacity. And bottom line, there are damages right now. California moved forward with cap and trade based on these bogus and faulty models. There are millions of dollars of damages in California alone. After this climate agreement, we're talking about trillions of dollars of damages. When it comes to light, which it will, not only in the legal system, but to people around the world, there will be a revolution. And we will take back our freedom and sovereignty. But it's all rooted in the chemtrail geoengineering issue, because we can prove that these are a factor in our changing climate.
People in Europe need to understand that there is a war that is becoming global, that is being waged against civilian populations in particular. It is a form of neo-imperialism and neo-colonialism which aims to divide and conquer European and Middle Eastern and African and the world's population, for that matter, and to make them submit to a global order that does not serve the interests of most of the people on this planet, but that does serve the interests of a very few ruling elite, a very small, tiny, and particularly tyrannical ruling elite. There is no war on terror. There is a war that is being waged using proxy groups, terrorist proxy groups, and they are being used against nation states. In a period of mass unemployment and austerity, you now have terrorist attacks being committed by terrorists funded, armed and trained by Western intelligence agencies. There is no such thing as ISIS. ISIS is a creation of the United States. We know that from official sources of the US military themselves. Declassified documents from the Defense Intelligence Agency have confirmed that. And the French government is now attempting to drum up support for more military intervention in Syria. And what they want to do is they want to get in on the game. The game is almost lost. The Russians have routed much of the Islamic State. You now have Islamic State militants coming into Europe disguised as refugees. That will destabilize Central Europe. I think there is going to be a campaign against dissidents in France. They're very worried about the new media that has emerged in recent years, and they are very worried about the alternative media. One of the tools which the mass media uses to discredit any kind of rational questioning of the established order, and particularly the war on terrorism, is to deride those who would question the war on terrorism as conspiracy theorists. And I think you're going to see a crackdown on so-called conspiracy theorists and websites that actually publish rational and honest analysis of what is happening. So you're going to see more of that type of intellectual terrorism. I think that the current crisis, the refugee crisis, which is really a form of coercive engineered migration because they could have easily have been prevented, this form of coercive engineered migration is going to make this a lot worse, and it is going to create the conditions of civil war. And that is going to create massive social unrest. It's going to divide working people against each other. And the only people who are going to actually benefit from this are the war contractors, the military, industrial, media, intelligence complex. And that needs to be understood. And if we don't understand that, this is going to continue and it's going to deteriorate. We will find ourselves in a situation under martial law if this continues.
President Francois Hollande has requested meetings with President Obama and Vladimir Putin together to discuss combined efforts for the fight against the Islamic State going forward. What are your thoughts on this union? Will the U.S. and Russia be able to work together to get through this?
Why is the United States going to work with Russia when the United States has declared Russia to be an existential threat? Russia's invaded Ukraine. Russia's going to invade the Baltics, Poland. Putin is the new Hitler. When you talk about a country like this, you're not going to be cooperating with them. The United States will use this under the cover of fighting ISIL to overthrow Assad. This is Washington's way of ending the Russian involvement in Syria, which is protecting Assad. So the Russian presence in Syria is very effective, but it's very small. And so what happens when there's a NATO invasion of Syria? The Russians, what would they do? They would be crowded out. And so this is Washington's way of using an attack in Paris, which most likely was a false flag attack. It doesn't serve ISIL's purpose. It only serves the purpose of the Western political establishment.
Wir befinden uns in einem, meiner Sicht nach, verheerenden Dreiklang. Krieg erzeugt Krieg, also mehr Krieg. Krieg erzeugt Terror und mehr Terroristen. Und Krieg erzeugt Flüchtlinge. Die griechische Hydra ist das wunderbarste Beispiel. Ein Kopf wurde abgeschlagen, 2 wuchsen. Die Potenzierung dessen, was wächst, ist in diesem Fall viel größer. Von daher ist meiner Meinung nach der gesamte Vorgang an Verantwortungslosigkeit kaum zu überbieten. Dass er völkerrechtswidrig ist, möchte ich hier nochmal wiederholen. Und auch wenn die Bundesregierung glaubt, sich jetzt Schreiberlinge als Juristen zulegen zu können, die meinen, indem sie terroristische Organisationen zu Staaten deklarieren und zu staatstragenden Kräften das Völkerrecht ummodeln zu können, es bleibt völkerrechtswidrig. Es gibt keinen UN-Beschluss und damit ist es eigentlich eine Entscheidung, die im Endeffekt auch nach Den Haag und Internationalen Gerichtshof gehört.
In the last 8 months, ISIS has managed to sell what's worth $800 million worth of oil in the black market of Turkey. This is Iraqi oil and Syrian oil. And these are carried by trucks from Iraq, from Syria, through the borders to Turkey and sold in a less than 50% of the international oil price. Money and the dollars generated by selling Iraqi and Syrian oil in the Turkish black market is like the oxygen supply to ISIS and its operation. Once you cut the oxygen, then the ISIS will suffocate.
Для этого на нашем брифинге, помимо спутников и фотоснимков, были представлены и видеодоказательства со средств объективного контроля, зафиксирующие, как фуры-наливники не только проезжают, а просто пролетают контрольные пункты на турецкой границе. Причем это делают без остановки, как вы видите. Если уж и этого недостаточно нашим американским коллегам, то советуем посмотреть видео со своих беспилотников, которые, кстати, над сирийско-турецкой границей и нефтеносными районами, подконтрольными террористам, за последнее время в 3 раза больше стало. Когда американские чиновники заявляют, что не видят, как доставляется контрабандная нефть террористов в Турцию, это уже не лукавство, это попахивает прямым покровительством. А как понимать заявление главы Пентагона, господина Картера, о том, что авиация США в последние месяцы уничтожает только прибыльные предприятия нефтянки-террористов? Получается, что в течение 1,5 лет американцы уничтожали только убыточные объекты боевиков.
Here we have a country which is a member of NATO, an aspiring member of the European Union, a major player in the Eastern Mediterranean and in the Middle East, and it has been involved with an oil trade in buying oil from the most potent, the most repugnant terrorist organisation in the world, ISIS. And this is a country which is portrayed by the American governments, the British governments and the French governments as a reliable partner in fighting Islamic extremism. It is absolute nonsense. No one is really going to argue seriously that the revelation today about President Erdogan and the rest of the Turkish leadership wasn't known of by the Americans. They know what Turkey has been doing. So, quite frankly, they can say that they're going to bomb the oil lines, the ISIS oil lines in Syria, but why didn't they do that in the last year? Let's not forget when ISIS was advancing in Syria, end of 2013, beginning of 2014, there was not one condemnation of ISIS by the American, British or French governments. It was only when ISIS started advancing in Iraq, which has a government which is, let's say, pro-Western, that's when ISIS became a problem. But, you know, ordinary people in Britain, America and France hadn't heard of ISIS when they were advancing in Syria because it wasn't a problem. The West was quite happy to see another Islamist group in Syria weaken the Syrian government even further, because let's not forget the West, Turkey, Saudi Arabia and Qatar, they share a common goal in Syria, the overthrow of the Syrian government, the destruction of the Syrian state, and yes, they have been using Islamist terrorist groups to achieve that. They know that by destroying the Syrian state, that will end Russian influence in the Middle East, that will end Iranian influence in the Middle East, and it will take away Israel's arch enemy in the Middle East, which of course is Syria.
Der Paukenschlag, den die türkische Regierung mit dieser unverhältnismäßigen Maßnahme gemacht hat, ist dramatisch laut. Selbst wenn der Durchflug durch türkisches Gebiet für wenige Sekunden völkerrechtswidrig war, formal gesehen, so muss man sich ja die Frage stellen, was ist dann die richtige Reaktion darauf? Sicherlich nicht, das Luftfahrzeug abzuschießen. Da muss man ja schon genau timen, dass man innerhalb der 15 Sekunden wirklich das Flugzeug trifft. Also es ist ja fast ein geplanter Akt gewesen. So sieht es jedenfalls aus, dass das vorbereitet gewesen ist, dass für den Fall, dass sowas passieren sollte, sofort abgeschossen wird. Das heißt, das ist wirklich ein aggressiver, feindlicher Akt der türkischen Regierung gegen das russische Militär gewesen. Gleich hier mit einem Abschuss zu reagieren, ist jenseits aller Verhältnismäßigkeit.
wenn man ein Papier kennt aus dem Jahr 2001, ein UN-Papier, in dem festgestellt wird und geplant wird, dass eine Art, und es heißt dort wörtlich, Bevölkerungsaustausch stattfinden soll, und zwar zwischen europäischen Ländern und eben nicht-europäischen Ländern. Das heißt also, man hat dort eine Zahl genannt, nämlich zwischen 10 und 11 Millionen sogenannter Migranten, die nach Europa kommen sollen bis Ende 2016. Und zwar um a. die Wirtschaft in Europa anzukurbeln und b. die demografische Krise, also den Bevölkerungsschwund Europas aufzuhalten bzw. auszugleichen. Also es scheint offenbar ein ganz klarer Vorsatz auch dahinter zu stecken, dass diese Ströme hierher kommen, um das Land auch, ich sag mal, damit auch zu verändern.
How does a handful of people, a network of families, control so much of the world, like banking, transnational corporations, governments in terms of any major party that has a chance of forming a government, controlling the pharmaceutical cartel, the oil cartel, the biotech cartel, and so on. The point to make is that this has not been going on for a few years or a few decades, and thus they have had time to build a global structure, which we have today, that allows the few to control the many in a very simple way once the structure's in position. What they've done is create a secret society and bloodline family version of a transnational corporation. The goal of this web is to change society in every country based on a world government that would dictate to every country, a world central bank that would dictate all world finance in every country, a world currency, just electronic, not cash, a world army to impose the will of the world government, and a microchip population. Party politics in general has been a cold, calculated scam to allow the few to control the many. At the moment, and up to this point, people have been led to believe that there are two parties in America that have any chance of forming a government. One's the Republicans and the other one is the Democrats. Actually, as in every other country, they are not different parties. They are masks on the same face. And whenever they get into power, they are carrying out the will of the spider at the center of the web to constantly follow the agenda that that network at the center is dictating. What it means is that whoever is in power is controlled by this force, and therefore they advance the agenda of this force, which is the incessant centralization of power in every area of our lives, for a simple reason that the more you centralize power, the more power the few have over the many. What happens at the moment is someone will come along and tell you in an election campaign what they think you want to hear to vote for them. Like Obama, I'm closing Guantanamo, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, none of which has happened because it was never intended, and he knew it wasn't going to happen, but he needs to tell you what you want to hear to vote for him. How can Obama not close Guantanamo when he said he would? Because there's no contract. Until there's a situation where if someone says, for instance, there will be no carbon tax, there cannot, by law, be a carbon tax until there's been another election at which the person has said, well, actually, if you vote for me, there will be a carbon tax. Because at the moment, this is how it works. And it was done so blatantly by Obama. You tell people what they want to hear, and they vote for you. Then you get into government, and you do exactly the opposite. And this is not just Obama, though he's an extreme example. This is politicians and political parties all over the world. It's happening all the time. You have no choice in politics. They're masks on the same face. Politics is not the answer. In its present form, will never be the answer to what is going on. We have to do it. We, the people, have to do it. Because politicians are there to do the very opposite of what's good for people.
It started at the age of 6 years old when I was brought into what is known as the MyLab, some pronounce it MeLab programs. I was identified as an intuitive empath. Me and a few of the people that I was training with being brought into a program to where we were what they called IE support for the Earth delegation. And this was a federation of a large amount of ET federations that met to discuss the grand experiment. There were 22 genetic programs that were going on. Programs of them mixing their genetics and manipulating our genetics.
And that was ongoing?
Yes, it's ongoing right now. And this is what this was all about.
Did this involve these human-looking extraterrestrials?
Yes.
Splicing their DNA with ours, that kind of thing?
Yes. And manipulating our DNA.
How long do you think this program has been in action for?
Of the 22 different programs, they've been going on for different lengths of time. But the genetic manipulation of what we are has been going back at least 250,000 years.
Wow. What's the sequence of events that led to you becoming a whistleblower and that has led to what we're now seeing with this push towards disclosure?
I was contacted by an higher density ET group that has now been known as the Blue Avians. Blue Avians told me that them and the other beings that they are working with come from 6th through 9th density. And it comes from a different vibration or frequency. They've been here for quite some time. They've been observing, but they're here we're moving into a part of the galaxy that is a very high energetic part of the galaxy that's going to change the density of our solar system and our local star cluster. We're going to go through a transformational experience that is going to change us on a consciousness level, mainly. They are here with these giant spheres to help diffuse these large tsunami energy waves that are entering our solar system. And they're diffusing this energy to where we don't get too much at one time, and to give us more time to prepare.
If they didn't use these spheres, what did they say would happen?
That a lot of people would go mad and there would be a lot of chaos.
And when you mention these spheres, what are we looking at? People are not seeing spheres in their telescopes.
No. These are also other density, and a lot of people are thinking that these are giant spacecraft. And I am almost certain, after my many travels in these spheres, that these are these spheres on a giant macro level. Their message for humanity is that we need to become more loving, we need to become forgiving of ourselves and forgiving of others, thus stopping the wheel of karma. We need to focus on becoming more service to others on a daily basis. And we need to focus on raising our vibration and our consciousness. Prayer and meditation are what help you raise your vibration and help you raise your consciousness. And even if you don't know how to meditate, meditating is just almost a form of even daydreaming. Sit there and focus on your mind, and focus your mind on, as long as you can at first, on positive, loving thoughts, and on how you can become more positive and more loving to the people around you, and how you can become more service to others and more forgiving to yourself and others.
And what will that do?
It will change the world one person at a time.
Well, that's great.
Being yourself.
timeline that we're on at the moment is positive. And many people say, well, if it's positive, why is there so much pain and suffering happening at the moment? And that's a very good question, and I want to try and address it. If you are a member of the elite, you want a structure left. You don't want to destroy your country. What you want to do is to remove the people from that country, because it's wrong to think that high members of the elite, the Illuminati, don't appreciate the forest or appreciate rivers and seas. Of course they do. The only difference is they want it for themselves. So they want to walk out into a forest and not see anybody. They want to walk out to a beautiful waterfall and not see another living soul because they've all been murdered. That's the plan. They want all this beauty for themselves. They have never been taught to share. So that is a timeline that they wish. That is a timeline that must never be allowed to happen. There are a number of outcomes, a number of timelines, but it is the humans themselves who will dictate where we are on that. And the sad thing is that so few people are consciously awake, but there are enough people awake to make that decision. So there are enough of us, we can do it, and they are terribly frightened. The elite are terribly frightened of anybody who stands in their own truth. Now, we don't want to get into politics, but you remember several scenes where flowers are put down the barrels of guns. That is a nightmare to the elite, absolute nightmare, because if you retaliate with violence, then those soldiers will retaliate with violence, and everything is seen as equal. But if you face these people in a non-violent way, it is something that they can't cope with. It's often said that we will move into the fifth dimension and miss out the fourth dimension. My understanding is that we will pass through the fourth dimension but won't stop there. The fourth dimension is where, in street talk, the bad guys are. In more professional talk, it's where all the heavy, dense energies lie. And at the moment, they are so heavy and dense that they are bulging down into the third dimension. I believe that the human race will enter the fourth, but not stop there. It will move on to the fifth, at which point it will then stop to start the learning process. And this is a tremendous change, because those creatures that have oppressed freedom will actually be behind us from a linear perspective. And so, although we are technologically inferior to many of these creatures, we will prove that the spiritual capability of humans is actually greater. The Earth will choose to evolve. That is a natural course of all living creatures. If you have good intent, you will evolve towards the positive. If your intent is not of a good sort, then your evolution can be very variable and can lead you down a dead end. Those are the old energies. These are the energies that we are leaving behind. This planet is leaving that value behind it. And we are going forward with a far more open and truthful engagement between people on this planet. And even some people who are totally unawake are frankly quite sick of what's gone in the past. They want something different. People are crying out for a new way to do things. The future is ours. We just have to be brave enough to reach out and take it and do it in a way that is beneficial for us, our families, our friends, and the planet.